Hello, everyone. I will not be celebrating with my family for the most part due to me being high risk. I'm not going to be upset about it, it's nothing in control. I will certainly make the most of the time that I have to spare, though, by doing some recordings. I would very much like to do some build recordings for Cyberpunk, but that would require me to go through the basics and/or information regarding it. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I really want to talk about crafting, so let me start with how leveling works. I'm not talking about your character level, but the individual skill level. Whenever you click on an attribute, you will notice different tabs and or categories with perks in them. In the bottom left, you'll see an experience bar. That indicates the particular level with whatever it is that you are looking at. Now, that bar cannot level past the attribute. For example, if you have a character with 8 reflex and 7 blades, that means blades can only level one more time until that attribute is raised. Keep that in mind. Moving into crafting now. I'm going to credit Solid FPS for this information. I did check it out and it appears to be correct. Solid FPS, basically what he was saying and posting with his numbers is that it's quantity over quality, meaning the way to get the best experience with crafting is to craft items that require more materials. That's going to be your gray items, such as the pistols and armor, because those require, I think it's between 16 and 24 common materials to craft, so those will give you more experience, not just for the amount of materials being used, but also because of other factors such as conversion rates and a whole bunch of other messes that would be too complicated to really discuss. So just to make it easier, keep in mind that it's quantity over quality. More materials, more experience. While we're on the math subject, I do want to cover the dismantling part. I've taken some notes from my playthrough just to kind of like give you an idea here. But when you're dismantling items, you want to kind of do some mental math to see if it's worth dismantling or if it's worth selling. I noticed that with the perk that gives you more materials from dismantle, that weapons can result in 9 common parts, and it always depends on which weapon and things of that nature. Dismantling of a green helmet was 6 uncommon parts. Now, the math boils down to this. If you were to go to a merchant, they would sell you 1 common material for 50 eddies, 1 uncommon for 75, 1 epic for 250, and 1 legendary for 1,000. That means whatever you're dismantling would have to exceed whatever the merchant, or I'm sorry, if you're dismantling it, the cost of it is dependent on the materials, is basically what I'm trying to say. So the only way that it would be worth selling to a merchant is if the dismantling is not going to account for the total cost, right? So let's just say you have a, let's just say a 1400 eddy jacket, and then it's a legendary. Well, it's not going to be worth it because when you dismantle it, even one legendary is worth, one legendary material is worth 1,000. And then you're probably going to be getting uncommon materials from that, so or a common part. So let's just say that you can get at least 1 legendary part from it, and then let's just say 6 uncommon. That jacket has already paid for itself. That's how you have to think of the math. I'll put it in the description for you, but let's talk about now how to be smart with crafting. When it comes to crafting, if you're going to be doing it, that is, then the very first perk you ever get in Cyberpunk should be the one that says you get more materials from dismantle or deconstruction. The reason you want to do that is because you want to make sure you're getting the most materials from the very start. That way you have a pretty big pile of it to work with by the time you get to endgame. You don't want to start crafting in mass until you reach level 50. Don't touch your materials until then. Just start dismantling and crafting till then. And with that perk, you'll definitely get a leg up in that. Another way that you can be smart with crafting is to only dismantle things that would weigh something. As I was mentioning earlier, you can only level something as far as the attribute. So you're going to give yourself more breathing room as you level if you only dismantle the stuff that weighs something. Leave the other stuff alone, like the junk. The junk weighs 0, and you can dismantle that at any time. I do also want to kind of point out that one perk that says dismantles junk automatically. Do not take that perk. That is not the way to go with this game, because there are junk items that sell for 750 eddies each, and you don't want to dismantle those, because those are actually one of the few things that's worth selling. If you do the math for the 750 eddy junk, that will leave you with 6, I think it's, well, I'll have to do more testing, but I'm pretty sure it leaves you with 6 common parts. So if you were to do 6 common parts and you times that by 50, it'll come out to 300. So that would mean that the 750 eddy junk is actually worth more as sell than salvage. So yes, do not get that perk. That's another way to be smart. I would say probably the final thing that you can do to be smart is you can make up for the cost of not dismantling, or you can make up for the cost for not selling junk. Well, at least the junk that that's not 750 eddies, by selling food and alcohol. Food is usually worth between 5 and 10 eddies, and alcohol is usually worth 30 eddies. Those weigh nothing, so if you don't mind spending the extra time to sort through your inventory, you can loot all the food and alcohol and make up for the missing costs of the junk through that. Oh yeah. Crafting is much more complicated than it needs to be for an RPG. I was expecting that to be something for an MMO, but whatever. Okay, so now that we've gone through crafting, let me go ahead and talk about cyberware. I have to do some tabbing. Give me a second. Okay, this is going to be kind of important, not just for the builds that I want to do, but also for really any build out there. The biggest question is whether or not to use double jump or charge jump. And you'll notice that there's 2 different cybernetics for that. You have reinforced tendons and then reinforced ankle. It all depends on the build, but here's kind of what you have to think of with the 2 cyberware. The double jump is great for maneuverability in tighter spaces. The charge jump is good for height. If you absolutely have to reach something that is at a higher spot, then you can normally jump, then you will need the charge jump. But if it's maneuverability, you can use double jump. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's go and tab here. Operating system, where was that? Here. Okay, on cyberware, I do want to quickly discuss the whole debate with Sandevistan and Berserk and the other stuff. So you'll notice that a lot of people are building with Sandevistan more so than the others, and that's just a common, I guess, belief or viewpoint that Berserk sucks. I don't see that as true. I think that Berserk certainly has its uses. It just requires a bit more effort to work with, and it also requires you to be a little bit more on top of things. You see, with Sandevistan, at least some Sandevistan operating systems, especially the one you get from Fingers, is it? Yeah, it's Fingers. That one, if you have the, I think it's the biomonitor thing, which says it reduces your cyberware cooldowns by 30%, then you can essentially run that all the time. There's no cooldown in between you using that and it coming off. Berserk, on the other hand, even if you were to get all the attachments plus the biomod, then there will be at least a 2.5 second cooldown in between. Now, 2.5 seconds is really not the worst when it comes down to it, but it is certainly something that you have to be aware of. That's kind of where things boil down with those two. Let me go ahead and now talk about the attribute requirements for this, because this is another thing too you have to be aware of. You'll notice that with a lot of this stuff, and I'll switch over to show you as an example, that each cyberware does have a requirement. Let's see, is it circulatory? Yeah, I think it's under circulatory, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, it was bioconductor. Yeah, I got them mixed up. So bioconductor is the one that lowers the cooldown. But anyways, you can see that bioconductor actually requires strength. So you see, this is another reason why I think that Berserk is actually fine. It's because you're going to be going there anyways, so you might as well take advantage of it if that particular build you're doing does take bonuses from it. But yeah, so there's that. Let me go ahead and kind of finish this up with weapons. I still stand by what I said in one of my very first recordings with Cyberpunk in terms of what weapons are fine. But I do want to add to it a little bit. So I still think that revolvers, sniper rifles, and melee are going to be the most damaging weapons. But in terms of what's going to be most feasible and stuff, that's going to be revolvers and pistols. In the higher difficulties, it's very hard to make a melee build work. Early on, you're going to have to resort to using a weapon of some kind other than melee to, work around certain issues early on until you're able to get to a point where you can start taking hits. So for that reason, I think that revolvers and pistols are probably going to be the best in the game due to their long range, somewhat fast fire rate, and just the ability to do damage. Sniper rifles are probably the next best thing, but the problem is you can only use them at a distance. If enemies are getting too close to you, then it's very hard to use it. Not just for the scope reason, but also for the scope sway. Scope sway in this game is really freaking difficult to work with. And unfortunately, there's no hold breath or anything, so it's a pretty unfair advantage to the sniper rifles. But yeah, shotguns are fine if you're able to stay behind cover and kill the enemy that you're after in the first 8 shots, because your tactician is only going to have 8 shots in it, so you're pretty screwed if you have to reload, because it takes a lot longer than the other weapons. That's kind of like the boiled down version. I would say pistols and revolvers to be safe. Snipers can be a backup, and melee is just good raw damage if you can actually sustain the damage afterwards. But other than that, I wouldn't bother with it. Okay, that's all I have for kind of some basics information. The rest is going to be build specific, so I'll go and end recording and see if I can do one. Thanks for listening.